Hey guys, welcome back, or welcome if you're new, welcome to this little corner of the internet. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. Today I'm coming at you with a long form video because I've been enjoying making them, so I hope you're enjoying watching and listening to them. Today I'm coming at you with one that aligns with one of my 2023 intentions. One of my 2023 reading intentions was to start tracking my romance books normally on my Storygraph, which is something that I'd avoided doing for a lot of internalized like sexism, thoughts, whatever. But in a bid to do this, I thought I would come at you guys with this video for you and for me, so I can return to this video anytime that I maybe ever feel a certain type of way about tracking my romance books or reading them or whatever. And so this is a video in defense of the romance book, the romance novel, the romance genre. I've often found that there is a lot of stigma associated with reading romance books, whether they're literary enough, feminist enough, yada yada yada. But as someone who reads them for escapism and as also a black woman, I have found them to be a site of resistance. They are a place where I can dare to imagine that romance and love and happy endings are for women like me, that we can take up space and demand to be cared for. I think black women have been conditioned to accept that love is tough, that it doesn't necessarily include romance or flowers or any of the other things. We witness our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunts being treated a certain way and they accept it as enough for them. Romance novels have created a space for me where I can realise that I am deserving of swoon-worthy romance, of flowers, of elaborate dates and clear declarations of love, and I guess I want everyone to realise that too. More than any other literary genre, I think the romance novel has been misunderstood by mainstream literary culture, from editors to reviewers, writers and readers of other genres, especially my litfic hoes out there. I think I read my first romance book when I was about 12, or at least the first one that I like viscerally remember staying with me. It's called My Life Next Door by Huntley Fitzpatrick, and that was my first foray into the world of romances. This opened the door for other YA romance books such as Anna and the French Kiss or The Selection, to really anything that Sarah Dessen wrote. And I was never embarrassed about liking these. To me, they were books that I liked and they made me feel good and they gave me like a little warm, fuzzy feeling that I liked. It wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realised maybe these books weren't quote-unquote cool, not highbrow, not literary. No guy was ever going to want to discuss the merits of Sarah Dessen the same way that they were going to want to discuss Scott Fitzgerald or Steinbeck or Orwell. However, the older I've gotten, the more I found myself returning to these types of books. They're less YA, a lot more mature, but that same fuzzy feeling, that stayed. I found that in some bookish communities, romance doesn't necessarily get the respect that I think it deserves. People dismiss them as easy or trashy or not worthy of discussion. I think this is because the romance book largely appeals to a female audience. It is, after all, the most popular genre amongst women in the global West. Nearly all writers and readers are women. It has historically been a thing that if something is marketed towards women or femme-presenting people, it's viewed as less than. In my opinion, it's a way that patriarchy reasserts itself in popular culture. Romance readers, women, aren't as intellectual, you know? They don't have the ability to work through complex topics. Some women have even repackaged this misogyny, claiming that romance books are anti-feminist, that these books regress what women have been fighting for years with its notions of love and happily ever after, and women needing to be saved. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I think the romance genre is unproblematic. Lord knows it has its issues, but what I'm trying to say is that I think every genre presents problematic content and authors, and that doesn't make romance books any less worthy. In my opinion, they exist as both a feminist practice and as a site of subversion. Let's talk about the history of the romance book. The modern romance novel, as we know it, has its origins in the romantic fiction of the 18th and 19th centuries. In novels such as the Gothic romances of Anne Radcliffe or the works of Jane Austen, readers were introduced to a new form of fiction, one that primarily focused on the lives and struggles of female protagonists. Although modern romance novels have expanded to include both authors and protagonists of different genders, races, sexualities, and disabilities, historically romance novels separate themselves from other genres by being primarily by being primarily written by women, for women, and about women. Typically, the romance novel reflects the desires of their audience. Jane Austen's novels, as well as the works of the Bronte sisters, introduced female characters who were ultimately rewarded with successful marriages for expressing their own individualities or their own desires. For female readers tied down by social norms and conventions, these romance novels became a form of escape and inspiration. In the 20th century, there was renewed interest in the romance novel. The 1950s and 60s saw a shift towards narratives involving exotic locations and heroines who had careers outside of the expected roles of housewife or mother. Things like stewardesses and nurses were popular choices at the time. The 70s, specifically at the 1970s, saw an interesting shift, a massive shift really, for the romance novel. In 1970, Gordon Merrick published the first best-selling gay romance, The Lord Won't Mind, and in 1983, Gay Wick by Vincent Verga became the first published gay gothic romance. I say this to highlight that queer romance novels have been in the space and have existed, but they were overshadowed by the success and the demand of heteronormative narratives. Have we really made that much progress? Ugh. In 1972, Kathleen E. Woodiwise's The Flame and the Flower introduced a new subgenre, the bodice ripper. To this point, mass-marketed romance books featured very little sexually explicit material. Woodiwise's work changed that. It arrived in the thick of the sexual revolution and readers loved it. It was an instant bestseller that's credited with birthing the modern romance genre. There has thankfully been change since in the genre. Bodice rippers were notorious for featuring rape and abuse as part of the love story, and eventually they were replaced with narratives that didn't promote assault or violence. Bodice rippers remain a relic of their time. However, the impact of these novels has been long-standing, especially in the growth of things like smut. Woodiwise was not the only author changing things up at the time. Around this time, new female authors began publishing other steamy, scandalous titles that often earned the ire of critics as well as places on the bestsellers list. People like Jackie Collins, Danielle Steele, Nora Roberts pushed the envelope of what female authors could get away with, and many of them are still household names to this day. I guarantee your mum or your aunt has a Danielle Steele book. Within the last 20 years, there has been a steady shift towards novels that more accurately reflect the diversity of their readership. It would be completely remiss of me not to mention Beverly Jenkins, who has been writing historical romance featuring African-American protagonists since her debut in 1994. I think the history of the romance novel is important because I think it really importantly sets up any other points that I make about it, especially this one of the romance book, the romance novel as feminist potential. Some of the criticism that surrounded romance books is how unfeminist they are, and these criticisms aren't baseless. Bodice rippers and some of their counterparts that were popular during the 1970s were occupying the same cultural space as the feminist movement, but seeming to represent its polar opposite. As feminists were fighting patriarchy, romance novels were propping it up. However, despite the major shift in the genre in the late 1980s and early 1990s that saw the near disappearance of the bodice ripper and the emergence of stronger, more modern heroines, the idea remains that feminists and romance readers exist on polar ends of the spectrum, and this is just not the case. I think it's important to realise the feminist potential of romance books. When people, especially other women, deride romance, what they forget is that these books act as a site where subversion can and does happen. The subversive potential of so many books derided as trash is that they focus on female interiority, female pleasure, and female aspiration. The notions sparked by the romance fiction are that women's earthly desires for love, for sex, for chocolate cake, for professional elevation, for whatever it is that they so choose to want, can and should be gratified. Any work that dares to give its whole focus to the subject of female desire, its unapologetically incongruous elements, and its imaginative energy just can't seem to escape the stigma of trash. Disdaining readers of romance as susceptible schoolgirls or bored housewives seeking escapist thrills is easier than recognizing what people like Glynn and Jackie Collins and Edward G. Salmon have sensed: the revolutionary potential inherent in women expressing and exploring what they really want. And to me, that is a foundational tenet to feminism. As I've gotten older, I've realised that a lot of my own personal embarrassment of romance was embarrassment at femininity. I was trying to reject certain notions that would maybe make me seem weak, or like just not the feminist badass that I was aiming to be. But my feminist manifesto does not exist in a vacuum, separate and devoid of love. Human beings love love, whether that's friendship or familial or romantic, and I will make no apologies for that. One of my favourite and I think seminal feminist thinkers, Bell Hooks, talks about the importance of love to justice. In Outlaw Culture's Love as the Practice of Freedom, she states that without an ethic of love shaping the direction of our political vision and our radical aspirations, we are often seduced in one way or another into continued allegiance to systems of domination: imperialism, sexism, racism, classism. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. Now, if you will allow me to get on an even higher horse for a second, love is important and part and parcel of the feminist revolution. Hooks understood this especially, and even when it came to romance books. In an interview that she did with the Washington Post, she talked about how she often read 2 romance books a day. Talking about Harlequin, one of the OG romance publishing houses, she said that Harlequins serve as an important fantasy vehicle that offers an escape route for women trapped in dysfunctional families. She goes on to say, not because someday your prince will come, but because you will triumph over it and it will come right in the end. She bristles at the notion that the book set women up for disappointment and promoted unrealistic fantasies about being rescued, because only a crazy person doesn't want to be rescued. Hooks says that romance readers aren't stupid. They simply take from these books what they need at any given time, and Harlequin provides this fantasy. These books, she says, simply offer a moment of restoration. The central therapeutic message in Harlequin romance is that you will not be abandoned. What I am seeking is that love that will not let me down. I guess segueing from Bell Hooks, I think it's really important for me to talk about romance as a site of black joy and black joy as a form of resistance. A lot of my resurgence towards reading romances came because I was tired, physically and emotionally tired of existing in the world, walking through the world as a black woman. Romance fiction thus became an escape, a safe space where I could go to, a place where black joy can flourish and grow, where black women are afforded a happily ever after. Romance as a genre is a safe haven for so many of us. We come here to know what it is to love deeply and to be loved in return. For marginalised people especially, having a place to land, this inclusive, affirming space, is more important than ever. Romance writers have been pushing the boundaries for a long time, fighting for a space to tell our stories where women are sexual, black love is cherished, queerness is celebrated, where disabled people can have full and fulfilling love, and the working class people get happily ever after. I think this aspect is often lost in the noise. For a while, it felt like all I was reading, especially books by black authors, didn't center black joy. They were trauma narratives about because those are the ones that sold and hit the charts and everything. It felt like people could only consume black life or black literature when it was suffering, and there was no space to celebrate things like black love. Something that has become more important in my activism is craving a space that only exists for joy, and romance is one of those spaces. It's a space that I recharge, where I find some hope, where I don't lose sight of happily ever after. This isn't me being delusional about the current state of the world, but it's a place where I imagine otherwise, and imagining otherwise, imagining better, is a key tenet of my black feminist practice. I guess this video might seem a little bit holier than thou, like who cares this much about romance? But if people can make videos dissecting things like the Booker Prize, then I guess I can make this video about romances, right? I want to highlight that romance books have merit, that they exist with feminist potential and as a space for joy. I'm ready to get off my high horse now, but I hope I've given you maybe a thought of what romance could be, something to think about. And if you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I want to be able to say that I proudly consume things without ever letting other people kind of influence me, but I guess that's maybe not true. But what I'm hoping is that I've highlighted some of the important things that romance can present, that romance can be a site of feminist practice, can be a site of black joy, can be a site where women come to enjoy things simply because they're there to be enjoyed and not because we have to like dissect the literary merits. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you do know what I mean. Basically, this is me saying that romance books deserve just as much space as any other book, and let people enjoy those things. This is also a message to myself.